Probably the most unusual car I've had. Certainly one of the rarest. I don't know how many of these Owens Magnetics are left. Can't be more than a dozen or so in the whole country. I don't think I've ever met anyone that's ever heard of this or has any idea what it is. They call it the car of 1,000 speeds and the magic of magnetism. You know, it's not really magnetism. I guess it is magnetism, but it's electricity. Still a bigger mystery now as it was back then. Welcome to that episode of Jay Leno's Garage. The car we're featuring today, one of the rarest, most unusual, fascinating, nobody's ever heard of automobiles, my 1916 Owens Magnetic. I've had this for about 30 years. I looked forever to find one. They just didn't seem to exist anymore. This is a electric car that's powered by a gasoline engine. Now, that almost sounds like, well, it doesn't make any sense. Why just drive it with a gasoline engine? Well, it's interesting, you know, in the early 1900s or the late 1800s, there were electric cars. In fact, there were electric cars before there were gasoline cars. My 1909 Baker electric, which you've seen on the show a bunch of times. But battery technology was not very good. You couldn't go long distances. What this is, the gas engine powers an electric generator which runs the car. So you can get mileage, long mileage, or high mileage rather, with electricity powering the vehicle. The advantage of this is there's no transmission, there's no shifting. I'm going to explain how this works. It's very unusual. There is no mechanical connection between the engine and the rest of the drivetrain. The engine, gasoline engine, is separate, and what you have is, for lack of a better word, almost like a flywheel. Think of a horseshoe magnet going around an armature and creating electricity, and that's what powers this car. So when they call it the magnetic, you go down the road with this weird kind. You know when you put two polar opposite magnets together and they sort of fight each other? That's what this feels like going down the road. There's no crunching of gears, there's no, which was seen as a huge advantage back in the day, because a lot of people could not drive a stick shift or the clutch was too heavy. This, you just move this lever here to go from one, quote, quadrant to another. I've got a fascinating piece of film. My friend Scott Anderson sent me this. It was filmed in 1916 to explain how the Owens Magnetic worked. There's some footage of people in the snow with one of these driving it, but then they show you how the engine actually works, how it makes electricity. Obviously, it's a silent film, but this is, you know, it's 100 and something years old, this film. It was done on nitrate stock. I had it transferred to a digital format so I could put it on a DVD so that, you know, I wouldn't eventually, nitrate can ignite like that. It can also deteriorate quickly. So we got something that'll last forever. It's not very long, but just give you some idea of how it works, how it generates electricity. Let's take a look at the engine first. The engine is a Buda. Now, Buda was a company, there are a lot of companies that just made engines. Continental, Beaver, a bunch of these companies. And they were used for everything from running sawmills to powerboats to automobiles. So the engine itself is pretty traditional. You've got an auto vac, which works as a fuel pump. This is your horn here. This is the unit that allows you to use the electric transmission. It says right on it, do not attempt to play with this, see your dealer. Well, there haven't been any Owens Magnetic dealers now for almost 100 years, so we just had to take our chances with that. What's missing here, you'll see an exposed gear. That is a air compressor. You put that on there so you can fill your tires if you need be. This car sat for the longest time because this piece here, this valve cover, was porous. And oil literally came out of every facet of it. We sealed it, we did what we could, and we had to make a new one using 3D printing. This is one of the first items we 3D printed. Let me get that and show you what I'm talking about. This is the original valve cover. Now when you look inside, you can see first of all, the metal is just starting to flake off, all that porosity. As you see, we tried to coat it and seal it, but that all wore off. And you'd go down the road and literally oil would ooze out of every pore. We scanned this using our ferro arm and our Stratasys printer, and we're able to make another one. You can see it's all, as I said, it's all flaking up. It looks good, it looks okay, but it's actually, I mean, oil come out of every pore. So we made it first in plastic. And this is a great thing about 3D printing. You're not going to find this valve cover anywhere. Okay, so as you see, and we're able to seal it, and then we sent it off to our pattern maker well, this is our pattern, I guess. We sent it off and had it made up in aluminum. Now there is 3D printing that actually does it in metal now, but that's not what we use. We want to do it first. We want to make sure it fit. We fitted it, ran it with the plastic cover on it just to see if it would fit, and it would work fine, and so made a brand new one, which you cannot tell from the original. I mean, it copies every part of it. There's no casting numbers or anything on here, but if there were, it would have picked them up. And the cool thing about 3D printing is you can add extra material in areas where, you know, it might be susceptible to porosity or cracking or anything of that nature. So that was pretty cool. You know, when I first got this, we built the chassis first, and for about 2 years I just drove the chassis around because people are fascinated to see the electrics. We put a glass window in it, but then what happened was, well, by the time put the body and everything on, we couldn't show people that anymore. So I've got some pictures. Let me get those. Okay, here's some early pictures when we first got it. As you can see, a lot of rust and corrosion. The climate in Norway not conducive to saving cars. Here is the chassis before we obviously did it. There's that unit again that controls everything with resistors in it. There's some shots of the tail-ended electric transmission. Okay, here's the body. It was pretty much all there, but the wood just all rotted, as you can see. But you got the thing that people would hang a blanket or a lap robe there because cars didn't have heat, especially in the back and open cars like that. So you'd wrap that around, the blanket around there. Another shot of the body. Some of the original leather. It looks like it's good, but it's so brittle, he touched it and it fell apart. The firewall's not in yet there. These hold the top down. As you can see, this is pretty rough. But you can see why people didn't think it was worth anything, sitting in Norway for 50 years. Oh. Now this is a brochure called the ABC of the Owen Magnetic. Okay, this is what you saw in that footage a while ago. You see, this comes off the engine. Let's see if we can get a better. Okay. Okay. There's the engine there. At the end of the engine, there's that horseshoe magnet. Let me do this. You see? And the horseshoe magnet spins at crankshaft speed. That creates electrical field, which spins this, which runs the electric motor. And then you have, I will show you on the steering wheel, these various points here. There's a cutaway again, and there's the whole chassis right there. It uses no gears of any kind to shift the car. This is a report by the Society of Automotive Engineers. I got the original. This is a copy on the Owen Magnetic with the electric transmission, just to show you how it works. Let me find the, okay, here we go. Okay, here is, I'll have it up in the lift in a minute. You'll see this. Let me get this. Here's a diagram. There's the engine, crankshaft comes. Now you know that horseshoe piece? There it is right there. And this is your electric transmission here, and transfers it back. As you can see, there's, at no point does the engine actually touch or connect with the transmission other than through electricity, or magnetism as they call it, which is kind of cool. These are all the positions you have: charging, starting, off and brake, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then direct. Each one of these gives you more or less electricity. First gear is at the most if you're on a hill or you're trying to hold it or something. I'll explain that in a second. You can, if the batteries are low, you can pull over, move the lever to charge, rev the engine a little bit, and that will charge the batteries. That's not as necessary now because of these, modern Optima batteries, which hold a charge and are much more potent, I guess you could say. Now, the genius behind the Owens Magnetic was a man named Justus Entz. He developed this electric transmission and patented it in 1900. He actually built it in 1897. I've got a copy of the patent right here. I just wanted to track it down. Here it is here. See, there's his name. It's sort of similar to the way a lot of diesel locomotives and things work, but it's 1900 he patented this. The trouble with this car was it was so expensive. This was $9,000 to build, and which was a lot of money in 1916. You figure Model T was just a few $100s, so you could buy 50 Model Ts. And this car has a fascinating history. This came out of Norway. A guy named Willie Gilbert bought it. At the time he bought this car, there were only 123 cars in Norway. This is the only Owens Magnetic at the time. I think it was the most expensive car in Norway. Willie Gilbert was a bit of a showman. He was also in the Olympics. I think he won a medal in the Olympics in either 16 or 1920, somewhere around that point. But he did win a medal. So it's interesting. The car has very low mileage on it. It's got like 10,000 miles, because what happened was it was bought, I guess, about the time of World War I. Then it was used for a while, and then it was hidden for 50 years to keep it away from the Nazis and whatnot, who would have confiscated it. It was hidden away. Then in the 60s, it was brought to America. A guy named Izzy Lieberman, who I got it from, an interesting older gentleman. It's needed, obviously, a lot of work. I'm so grateful to the people that saved it, because, as you can see from those photos, it was just really, at least in Norway, a piece of junk. Why would anyone want an old junky car? It didn't make any sense. But in those days, car collecting is not like it is now. It was just a car that was outdated, and nobody could figure it out. I mean, if you got in this car without having some prior knowledge, I don't think you would know how to drive it or even start it, because the starting process is extremely simple, but really unusual. And I will show that to you in just a minute. This car also has electric brakes, which is fascinating. When you're driving this car, what you do is, say you're going 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, rather than step on the brake, you move the lever up to the, to the neutral position, and you hear, whoo, and that's, you hear the electric motor, whoo, just connect and power it down and just slow it down. So you don't use the brakes until you actually want to come to a full stop. You slow down using the transmission, and you just move that lever up and down. And when we go for a drive later, you'll see it's really quite simple and actually kind of fun and fascinating how it works. I mean, we all know how regen works in the Tesla and the Chevy Volt. It's the exact same thing. On those cars, you can adjust the amount of regen, and this one is pretty much fixed, but it works very well, and it only has brakes on the rear, but it's enough because you're slowing it down using the transmission, so the brakes don't get hot trying to stop a 4,000-pound car. I think that's about what this thing weighs. Engine, nothing special. As I said, just a regular 6-cylinder engine of about 60 horsepower, something of that nature, which was quite a bit back in 1916. Don't forget, a Model T only had 22 horsepower, and that went 40-something miles an hour. But you can drive this along at 60, 65, and you're fine. But as you go down the road, you just, I read an article, a period, was written period back in the day, and it said it was a bit like if you've ever been in a wagon with a sail on it, or a car driven by a propeller where it's cutting through the air. That's what this is like, because you don't feel any mechanical drive. It's all electric. and extremely smooth. Well, you'll see in just a minute here. Let me shut this hood again. I'll show you the other side, carburation side. Nothing unusual, pretty standard, but probably want to see it anyway. As you can see, we didn't do a whole lot to the engine. This car had less than 10,000 miles on it. So we kept it pretty stock. We weren't going to tear it all apart and polish all the aluminum. We wanted to, because I do drive it and I use it, so it has all the fixtures they had in the day. These are your priming cups. The way these work is, in cold weather, you would open this like this, and you pour some gas straight into the cylinder, put it in 3 or 4 of them. We do all 6 if you want, so the car will start instantly. That's what those are used for. Exhaust manifold, carburetor, magneto, fan, pretty standard fare up to this point. Come on, I'll show you some of the power systems on the other side. This is a 24-volt system. Let me open this. As you can see, we like to use the Optima batteries. These batteries have been in here for 10 years and they seem to last forever. The nice thing about Optimas is they're sealed. You know, most batteries give off gas, so when you take a cover like this off, you've got corrosion and rust and every other kind of thing in here. So these, for this application, work terrific because batteries are not particularly reliable in 1916, so they work perfectly. The only concession to modern electrics is this Vanner unit right here. This is a 24-volt system and a 12-volt system. The lights, everything else is 12 volts. The transmission is 24 volts. With this Vanner unit, we have 2 batteries. This makes sure each battery charges equally. One doesn't overcharge on the other, and so that's why that's in there. But that's really the only thing that Ents, well, Ents didn't even need it back then, but just for the sake of making it easier for us to understand and work, this Vanner unit works terrific. All right, everything happens up here at the steering wheel. This is advance and retard on the ignition, and this is a throttle. You've got 9 points here. If the batteries are low, you start the engine and you move the lever up to charge. You have the engine, it charges the engine fairly quickly. That's your starting position. That is neutral. That is first gear, much like the first gear in an automobile. That's your power gear. That's giving the most torque to the electric motor to get up a hill or whatnot. Second gear, you start to cruise. Third, fourth, fifth, and then if you're on a highway or a long stretch, you put it in high. And that would be the equivalent of 1-to-1, like an overdrive and direct drive. That's how that works. So that's kind of cool. Let me show you how this thing works. To start it, I throw this switch. We add an electric fuel pump. I put it on charge. You start the car in gear. I'll show you that in a minute. You've got your gear lever on this side. You have reverse, and then you have a granny gear, which is a really low mechanical gear. I never use that. And that is the standard gear. Now, I move this lever up here like this. That's choke. This is your ignition on, neutral, and start, and charging. When you start it, you put it over here. Once you're running, if the batteries are fully charged, you don't want to overcharge them. Oh, that doesn't really happen with the Vanner unit and whatnot. You put it in neutral, and that cuts the power to it. And then you just drive normally. This is your speedometer here. I like this storage, but I gotta get a shot of that. That's original to the car. And you have these little glove compartments on each side. Come on, let's go around the back of the car and we'll take a look. Well, as you can see, the back seat is pretty spacious. Got all kinds of leg room. These are jump seats. I don't think I've opened these, and let's see what we got here. See how these work. Oh, okay. What do I got here? Oh, it's another SAE report. Oh, I remember this. What's this guy's name? Oh, this is the fun part about having these kind of cars. I put this in here a couple of years ago. A gentleman named Tom Ricketts, he sent me this from a 1911 Owens Magnetic. Look at that, it's pretty cool. You know, I wondered what happened to this. I didn't realize I'd stuck it in this jump seat. So, well, Tom, thank you, thank you very much. I don't know if I called you and thanked you at the time, but, oh, very cool. Look at this. Let's see what we got here. When you realize these had an electric transmission in 1900. Well, I'm going to call him and thank him. But anyway, that'll give you some idea how the jump seats works. There's two of those back there. We redid all the wood. We didn't really do this like a Pebble Beach restoration. We just did it as a fix up an old car kind of restoration, you know. And it turned out pretty nice, and it's a nice driving car. I have to admit, it took a while to figure it all out, how the electrics work. Let me put this back here like this. And you got your footrest here. Kind of a safety feature. Keep your feet there to brace you in case of a crash. Yeah, that'll work. That's kind of cool. Oh, let me show you where the gas gauge is. You'll love this. Okay, here at the back of the vehicle, got one big tail light. That's all you needed in 1916. About, what's that, 24-gallon tank, something like that. And conveniently, the gas gauge is right here at the back. So, if you want to know how much fuel you have, just stop the car, get out, walk around, look at that. Oh, we're almost full, honey. There you go, okay. Gas cap right here with Owens Magnetic right in it. Spring shackles, these are your lubricators here. You just tighten those every once in a while, send more grease into spring shackles. And that's pretty much it. So I think it's ready to bring next door and put up on the lift. Come on. Okay, we've got the Owens Magnetic up on our sterile Coney lifts. As you can see, rear end is pretty standard stuff. Typical mechanical brakes on each side. Period shock absorbers. This is where it gets strange when you get to where the transmission normally would be. The transmission axle consists of two direct current dynamos, okay? The forward one has this field ring attached to the engine crank, and that takes the place of the ordinary flywheel. That's up here. This field always revolves at engine speed. Now, the armature is mounted on the large hollow shaft, which is directly connected to the propeller shaft. If that makes any sense to you, okay? And the machine is called a clutch generator, as it acts as both a clutch and a generator. All right. This is a resistor of some sort here. I gotta admit, I'm still not totally versed on, you know, this guy, Justice Entz, was pretty amazing. I mean, I can understand it, but a lot of it, you know, Sherlock Holmes used to call electricity the high priestess of false security. I used to like that phrase. But it's somewhat true, because I don't really understand electricity in all its ways. But the fact that you had this transmission in 1897, up here it's all standard automobile. You got a crank, and then the crank is primarily not to start the car, but just to set timing and move the engine about and do what you need to do there. Honeycomb radiator, nothing unusual there. Notice no brakes in the front, straight axle. All of that is still pretty much 1916, but for the most part, you saw the inside of it. And the other cool part about this is, this engine is exactly as it was in 1916. All we did was clean it, just electrical cleaner, just clean off the contacts and the brushes. The brushes and the all look original. They last seemingly forever. They say there's so little strain on it that it'll last the life of the car, and since this car only had 10,000 miles on it, all I've done, as you can see up there, is add an electric fuel pump. That's all we did there. But okay, I think we're ready to take this thing for a ride, so let's show you what it's like to ride in a early hybrid car. You know, this is really just a Chevy Volt if you want to put a fine point on it, because it's basically the same principle. The engine never runs the car. It's always run by electricity. But come on, let's take it for a ride. All right, let's show you how we start it. Put it on start. Move the lever from neutral to S, which is start. Put your foot on the brake, because you always start this in gear. You have 3 speeds here, well, 2 counting reverse. You have a granny gear, which is really low, you never use. So you just put it in high, as they call it. Just leave it in high and release the brake, and just move this up to S. And you see there's no starter noise because it's spinning the whole engine. Watch. It starts, come to neutral, put it in 1 and pull away. Don't have to touch the gas. Look at that. Very nice. So you never ever touch the shift lever. When you want to slow down, you put it in neutral and you engage the electric brake. Electric brake cancels after below 15 miles an hour. I think Caruso, the famous opera singer, had one of these. The slippage generates electricity. Looking at our gauges here. I'm going to engage the electric brake now. You tell me if you hear it engage. Oh, here it is. Here it makes that kind of Mr. Bill, woo, kind of noise. Nobody knows who Mr. Bill is. He's a cartoon character on Saturday Night Live. But whenever you put it in neutral, the electric brake goes, whoo, and you feel the car slow down. As soon as it hits 50 miles an hour, the electric brake cuts off, and you use the foot brake. The advantage to that is you've got brakes in the rear wheel only, and brakes back in the day were not that good. So going down the hill or something, the electric brake will always stop you, always slow you down. So it's a safety feature as well. This is really a fascinating automobile. I never realized how unique and complicated it was. Yo! Acceleration is good, especially for 1916. Hi guys! It's obviously much smoother and quieter than a Model T, but the advantage is you're not grinding gears, you're not shifting all the time. Coming to a light, I'll engage that electric brake. Oh, light change. Okay. In 1916, most people cruised at about 35 miles an hour. 40 was considered kind of moving, you know, so 60 was really fast. And most roads were dirt, so and then the electric brake cuts out. It's really the same way an electric motor on a diesel locomotive works. I mentioned a Chevy Volt before, and I think that's the best comparison. You would take your foot off the gas and really disengage. And with modern batteries like this Optima, this thing will run forever. Your battery will never run low. But of course, back in the day, 1916, you had these massive lead acid deals. You know, I had a Chevy Volt for about 7 years, put 90,000 miles on it, of which only 3,800 were gas. So the engine virtually lasted forever. You did one oil change in 7 years. And I thought that was one of the greatest cars. Bulletproof, go anywhere in it. This is probably the most unusual car I've had. Certainly one of the rarest. I don't know how many of these Owen Magnetics are left. Can't be more than a dozen or so in the whole country. You know, this website is all about unique driving experiences. And this truly is unique. It's just so different than anything that was available, well, almost up until the Chevy Volt. I mean, you didn't have electric cars like the Baker, but those were sort of a prisoner of this low range. You know, they couldn't go very far, and it took a lot longer to charge batteries back in 1960 than it does now. Even now, it takes a long time to charge the batteries. You know, I mean, obviously compared to a fill-up, you know. Whereas with this gas car, you have all the advantage of electricity with no disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage was range, and he didn't have to worry about range because you just put more gas in it. And the engine is so understressed, all it does is just runs and generates electricity, but it doesn't hurt the motor. So consequently, this engine never ever overheats. I don't think I've ever met anyone that's ever heard of this or has any idea what it is. And when you look at they call it the car of 1,000 speeds and the magic of magnetism, you know, it's not really magnetism. I guess it is magnetism, but it's electricity. And still a bigger mystery now as it was back then. Well, you see how smooth it is. My speedometer doesn't work. I got to put a new cable in. So I just use my Apple Watch. It's got a speed app on it. But you know, I drive this thing everywhere. In the summer, it doesn't overheat. It runs fine. You come to a hill and need a little more power, you just drop it down a gear. Well, it's not a gear. I keep saying a gear. And see, it'll make one. Oh, there we go. Obviously, it's not a performance car because that electric transmission is heavy. But boy, is it beautifully made. All copper wiring, you know. Just beautifully designed, beautifully made. When you realize it's basically 120 years old, I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. You know, I've had a few electrical engineers look at this thing, and they're just blown away by it. It was designed 120 years ago. And I was hoping to do this one when the pandemic thing is over and we had the full crew, but I don't know when that's going to be. So I was out driving this the other day and I said, let's just do this one. So I hope I explained it to you. If you Google Owen's Magnetic, you'll find some more detailed explanation of exactly how this thing works. Because although we got it running and got it working, I still don't quite understand it. I mean, I kind of do, but I'm not embarrassed to say it's over my head. But this guy, Justice Ernst, pretty amazing character. I love reading books and stories about engineers because they're really the people that built this country, you know. A lot of people had the idea, a lot of other people took the credit, but the person that actually designed it and made it, they're the real geniuses. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little trip down the, is that memory lane? I don't know. I don't know what it is. Just something different. You know, we try to find unusual automotive experiences, and it's fun to look at this period in history when everything wasn't set in stone. You didn't have an internal combustion engine with the transmissions, right? You had all this experimentation going on, and this is a classic example of that period. So I hope you got a kick out of seeing how well this thing works and runs, and I'm going to step on the electric brake now and park this thing. Anyway, thanks for checking it out. See you next week, you guys.
Mm-hmm.